Hello, my prodigious plumbing adepts. I am your humble host, Hollywood, and welcome to a lesson on how to install an emergency shutoff valve. These valves are commonly called angle stops in the industry, and they are the first point of operation on any plumbing system. They are required by code, at least here in the States, so that any faucet or toilet can be shut down for maintenance and emergencies, and the rest of the system can remain operational. The first step in the process is to identify what type of valve you need, and to do that, you first need to know what type of piping you have coming out of the wall to feed your fixture. It could be a variety of different kinds, depending on where you live and common practices of the area. But here in the United States, it will most likely be copper. The next most used material is PEX, which is a flexible plastic, followed by galvanized steel, and finally CPVC, which is a more rigid plastic pipe. All these different possibilities have their own potential angle stop needs, so knowing which kind of system you have is essential. For today's video, we are reviewing the copper option, as it's by far the most common, and more specifically, the 5/8 by 3/8 compression angle stop. This means the inlet size of the valve is 5/8 and the outlet size is 3/8 to supply the sink or the toilet. 3/8 outlet size is the closest we have to a universal size in the plumbing industry, and I recommend sticking with that outlet size for all fixtures, with the exception of the refrigerator or a water filter. This may mean that you will need to replace the flexible supply line along with the angle stop to make sure the sizes match, but you should be doing that anyway. A lot of the new faucets will have these lines built into the faucet, and if that's the case, then the size will be 3/8 compression. If you want me to make a video covering all the possibilities and differences in piping and valves, I will be happy to do so. Just leave a comment on what you need help with or any questions you may have, and I will respond. Here are the tools needed to get the job done. A couple of adjustable wrenches, some thread sealant, a small bucket, and some rags or a towel on standby. The parts of the valve to identify and make sure that you have before getting started are the body, the compression nut, and the ferrule. The ferrule is the linchpin of this design and is responsible for making the seal against the water pressure inside the pipe. Now, copper compression valves are some of the easiest to install, and if you're replacing an existing valve, it's also easy to identify. The telltale nut with the thin pipe going into the back end is a dead giveaway. As always, ensure the water is off to the home or business by opening a faucet and waiting for the pressure to dwindle. If a faucet's unavailable, then open the valve with a small bucket underneath to drain the system before removal. The angle stop will unscrew to the left to remove the existing unit, but it's important to realize that the compression angle stops will spin freely on the pipe, and a backup wrench is necessary to hold the body in place while the nut is loosened and unscrewed. Apply a little thread sealant to the inner edge of the new valve and slide it over the pipe. Often, we can use the existing nut and ferrule with the new valve, and there is a debate in the industry if this practice is a good way of doing it. In this case, we are using the existing nut and ferrule because this particular customer needed the water back on as soon as possible, and a few extra minutes and potential problems to remove the nuts and ferrules was too big a risk. Every job is different, and there are many reasons to do things a certain way. Use your best judgment to make that determination. Once the valve is in place with the nut screwed snugly on the threads, use both wrenches to tighten the nut to the body. It's also a good idea to leave the 3/8 nut over the outlet threads so they're protected while you're wrenching the valve. With that done, make sure to screw on your flexible supply lines and restore the water pressure. No Teflon or thread sealant is necessary for the hoses because they have their own rubber seals in place. Open the main water valve slowly to protect the system from unnecessary stress and build the pressure gradually. Turn on your angle stops and test the faucet for leaks.
I also want to go over a touchy subject for a lot of plumbers out there. Some disagree, some agree. I'm of a different school of thought where if you're trying to replace an existing valve, say this was an existing valve, we have to pull it off because it's leaking, it's not holding pressure, whatever the deal is, it needs to go. Is it okay to retain the compression nut and ferrule? Well, that is debatable. Let's go over a couple of things while we're here. Let's go ahead and pull this new valve right off, and you'll see what I mean. New valve, now it's loose. So, pull the nut back, and we can expose that compression ring. That compression ring is now tied to this pipe. This pipe, it's kind of compressed on there, and it's creating a different shape. So the pipe is now in the shape of the compressed ring, not necessarily a true round. So the debate is, if we have a new valve, is it okay to just put the new valve on the old nut and ferrule and tighten it down? Well, it depends on how old this is. So it's happened to me before where we've tried to reuse the old nuts and ferrules, and we've actually over-tightened them, and these nuts aren't quite as strong as they once were, and they get brittle. Sometimes they crack. It's easier to over-tighten an old nut than it is a new one. So, in my opinion, if the nut and ferrule are under 2 or 3 years old, I would say it's probably okay to leave that on there and reuse it. Now, that being said, it also depends on the brand of valve that you get. So this is a Brasscraft, one of the most common brands that you're going to find. The penetrating depth, so the distance from the edge of the ring to the bottom of the valve, that's this little gap, this distance right here. That's going to determine a little bit. So if you get a different brand, sometimes it's deeper, sometimes it's a little bit more shallow. You don't get so much penetrating depth. And if it's a little more shallow, say the penetrating depth stopped right there and you put the nut on and you tighten it down, well, this pipe is going to bottom out against the bottom of the valve before it's able to reach the ferrule. So when you tighten the nut down, it's going to suck the ferrule against this valve body. And that action, when it's already been compressed once, could damage the pipe and cause a leak, which is probably why it's a better idea to use dope around that ring just a little bit. It gets you a long way there, trust me on that. It's a better idea to get a like-for-like valve. If you can find another valve that has the same penetrating depth and the same thread count on that compression nut, sometimes they're coarse threaded, sometimes this is a standard compression thread, but they do vary, so you have to be cognizant of that. Just the fact, when you tighten it down again, if it stops suddenly and it doesn't seem like it's all the way tightened before it gets hard to turn, then it might be a problem where the thread count is different. You need to pull the valve back off and make sure the thread count is the same. She's good. All right, so let me know in the comments what you think. If you're a plumber and you have an opinion on the matter, let me know. I'd like differing opinions. Now, some other plumbers are saying it's better to always pull the nut and ferrule off. I'm a sometimes guy. Sometimes if it's over 2 or 3 years old, pull it off, redo it, especially if you have the meat on the pipe. Sometimes it's better just to cut this, if you have enough copper sticking out, just cut the old nut and ferrule off and use what's left to attach the new valve to. That's probably the best method if you have that much pipe. Now, you're going to be a little limited in a lot of the installations doing that. So some plumbers will say always reuse the old nut and ferrule because it's a less likelihood of damaging the pipe. It's hard to do though, so I'm kind of a sometimes guy. It depends on the situation, really. And that's going to be true for most people, I would think.
If you like this video, then leave a like and subscribe for more professional plumbing tips and tricks. See ya on the next one.